So there's this book,
Yeah.
and it's so dangerously effective at teaching psychological manipulation that it is actively banned in like a lot of modern prisons.
Right. Which is wild to think about.
It's insane. And it's not because it incites, physical violence or gives them a blueprint for escaping a cell.
No, not at all.
Right. It's because authorities are just terrified that if inmates internalize these lessons, they won't just go back out and commit petty crimes. They'll become like master strategists.
Yeah, they develop the capacity to pull off these grand, sophisticated, entirely systemic manipulations once they're on the outside.
Exactly. So, welcome to Deep Dive. I am incredibly thrilled you're joining us today because we are wading right into those murky, controversial waters. We really want to understand exactly what makes this knowledge so terrifying to the people in charge.
And you know what's fascinating here is the tacit admission by the authorities who actually ban this material.
Right, like they're proving it works.
Yeah, exactly. By forbidding it, they are confirming that the information is effective. They're validating the premise that power dynamics aren't just random. They operate on this very specific, exploitable set of rules.
Yeah.
So whether you view this collection of strategies as, a manual for villains or maybe a protective shield for the innocent, the undeniable reality is that these tactics are not fiction.
They're happening right now.
Right now, by politicians shaving policy, high-level corporate executives in boardrooms, and social climbers. This material doesn't invent manipulation. It just catalogs the darker realities of our psychology with, honestly, unflinching clarity.
And that brings us to our mission for this deep dive. Today, we are taking a really comprehensive look at the specific rules of manipulation, office politics, and grand power dynamics, detailed in Robert Greene's infamous framework, the 48 Laws of Power.
Yeah, it's quite the framework.
It really is. We're going to map this entire territory, starting from interpersonal trickery in a subtle one-on-one conversation, all the way up to the terrifying mechanics of mass psychological control. We want to give you, the listener, a complete blueprint.
But I think it is crucial to establish our objective right at the outset here. Our goal is absolutely not to endorse these manipulative techniques.
Definitely not. Please don't do that.
Right. We are not advocating that you adopt a Machiavellian lifestyle and ruin the lives of everyone around you. Rather, we're here to dissect these rules totally impartially.
Yeah, just to look under the hood.
Exactly. Because by learning the craft, by understanding the exact psychological levers required to pull off a deception, you instantly become immune to it. If you know the dimensions of the trap, you spot the tripwire before you step on it.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have a massive amount of ground to cover, and we're going to start where most of our daily anxieties actually live.
The chessboard of relationships.
Right. We're talking about how you manage the people above you, the people beside you, and the people actively working against you. And the very first rule we encounter completely upends everything we are taught about meritocracy.
It really does. It's jarring.
The rule is simple, but wildly counterintuitive. Never outshine the master.
It sounds archaic, right? Like advice you'd give to a courtier in the 16th century.
Yeah.
But the psychological mechanism driving it is profoundly delicate and highly relevant to modern corporate environments.
Right, so the premise is that it's an absolute necessity to make your superior feel smarter than you. It is brutal about this reality.
Brutal.
It says your boss should never, ever realize that you possess a higher intelligence or better capability than they do. If you show off your raw talent right next to the person holding the keys to your career, you aren't proving your worth. You are plotting your own destruction.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at the psychological roots of hierarchy. Why would a leader logically punish a brilliant subordinate who could make the team successful?
Right, it seems backwards.
It all comes down to the fragility of ego. Ego is a remarkably precarious construct, especially for people who have clawed their way into authority. Their entire identity is structurally tied to the narrative that they are the smartest person in the room.
So if you ruin that narrative.
Exactly. If a subordinate enters that space and effortlessly shows superior intellect, it doesn't inspire the boss. It triggers an immediate existential threat response. The leader suddenly feels precarious. And history shows that a threatened authority figure will inevitably use their power to crush the source of that anxiety.
I was just thinking about how this plays out in a modern office. Like, let's say you're a junior analyst and you build this brilliant financial model.
Happens all the time.
Right. And a well-meaning colleague goes to the VP and says, hey, this junior analyst model is actually way more efficient than the one you built last year.
Ouch.
Yeah, the modern instinct is to smile, own your brilliance, and say, thank you, I worked really hard on this code. But applying this rule means you have to kill that instinct instantly.
Immediately.
You must reflexively reflect all the credit back onto the VP. You say, no, the only reason this works is because of the foundational architecture the VP designed. I just tweaked it based on their mentorship.
Yeah, you are actively manufacturing an illusion that their pre-existing greatness birthed your competence. You're not a competitor. You're empirical proof of their excellent leadership.
But hold on, let me push back on this, because there's a glaring logical flaw if you take this to the extreme.
Okay, what is it?
Well, if I am permanently downplaying my abilities, if I spend my whole career acting like a humble sponge, absorbing the boss's supposed genius, how do I ever get promoted?
Right.
Don't I just trap myself in permanent mediocrity? How does the subordinate ever become the master?
This raises an important question about the timeline of power, which is the critical nuance here. The rule isn't suggesting permanent subservience. It's a lesson in temporal restraint.
Oh, so it's about timing.
Exactly. You have to wait for the exact right moment to step out of the shadows. Until that structural shift occurs, until the boss is retiring or moving, or you've secured an unshakable alliance higher up, your survival depends entirely on playing the grateful student.
Makes sense.
If you jump the gun and reveal your superiority before you have the structural armor to protect yourself, you invite your own execution.
And there's a stark warning here. If you miscalculate, if you trigger their ego and the boss permanently marks you as a threat, your days in that hierarchy are mathematically numbered.
You're just waiting for the axe to fall.
Yeah. The longer you remain in the blast radius of a paranoid boss, the greater the danger. The only viable move is to switch sides entirely. You have to lateral out before they find a bureaucratic excuse to eliminate you.
Because fighting an enemy who holds structural power over your livelihood is a war of attrition you literally cannot win. You must remove yourself to neutralize their leverage.
Which flows directly into a concept that I found to be a real gut punch regarding human connection.
The paradox of trust.
Yes. We're taught from childhood that friendship is the ultimate safe harbor. But the strategic view of power introduces this brutal framework. Do not trust your friends. Learn instead to weaponize your enemies.
This is arguably one of the most intellectually distressing concepts we will discuss. It really demands we challenge the foundational social contract.
I mean, who else are you supposed to trust if you can't trust your friends? It feels incredibly cynical.
It does.
But the logic is undeniably sound. It forces you to ask who actually possesses the capacity to betray you.
Right.
A stranger can't betray you. An established enemy can't because your guard is already up. You anticipate their attack.
Right.
The very act of betrayal inherently requires pre-existing trust. So the moment you place unquestioning trust in a friend, you install the exact mechanism required for a catastrophic betrayal.
The structural vulnerability is what's key here. If you examine the greatest betrayals in history, from Caesar and Brutus to modern corporate boardrooms, they are almost exclusively perpetrated by close allies.
Why is that, though?
Because the friend is the only entity holding the keys to the fortress. By the nature of friendship, you grant them unfettered access to your vulnerabilities, your secrets, your blind spots. We aren't necessarily declaring every friend is a dormant traitor.
Right, that would be paranoia.
Exactly. But we must acknowledge the structural risk. We naturally overlook red flags in our friends because of emotional attachment. When you trust completely, the potential for total ruin is introduced into the equation. It's a variable you have to manage.
And the flip side of this equation completely recontextualizes how we handle our enemies. The emotional response to an enemy is to destroy them or isolate them. But a strategic mind recognizes that enemies represent an incredible untapped reservoir of utility.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's look at the classic wartime analogy from the source. Imagine you're a commander and you've captured a notorious enemy warrior. The standard procedure is execution. But what if you defy expectation? What if you look at this captive who is bracing for death and say, "You are a phenomenal talent. I refuse to execute someone of your caliber. I am offering you a high-ranking position in my own command."
What's fascinating here is the psychological alchemy that occurs in the captive's mind during that interaction. We have to extrapolate the cognitive dissonance.
Right, they were waiting to die.
Yes. They were prepared for the ultimate punishment. Instead, they get a pardon, elevated status, and genuine praise from the architect of their defeat. This creates a profound psychological flip. The spared enemy thinks, is this leader truly this magnanimous? Is this the visionary I should have been fighting for all along?
I can see how that translates to modern dynamics too. It's about trading mercy for fanaticism. That spared enemy suddenly has a massive psychological debt to repay. They have to prove that your unprecedented mercy wasn't a mistake.
Precisely. If you compare that to a comfortable, long-term friend who works for you, that friend often takes the relationship for granted. They feel entitled, they slack off.
Yet, they get comfortable.
But the converted enemy, they are fueled by a desperate need to demonstrate unshakable loyalty. They will work harder and defend you more aggressively than any friend ever could because their new status depends entirely on your continuing grace.
It's a brilliant, somewhat terrifying application of behavioral economics. But managing these perceptions is fundamentally an exercise in controlling information. It's about strictly managing the flow of data from your mind to the outside world.
Which brings us to the absolute necessity of constructing and maintaining a facade. In the realm of power, transparency is a critical weakness.
The core rule here is absolute concealment. Never reveal your true purpose or your ultimate plans. You must only ever showcase the final results. The second you vocalize your intentions, saying, "Here is the new business I'm trying to build," you hand everyone the coordinates they need to plot against you.
You give them the blueprint to sabotage your efforts.
Exactly. But I want to inject some realism here. It isn't always physically possible to operate in total silence. If you're a politician launching a campaign, you can't just stand at a podium in silence. You have to make promises. How do you reconcile hiding intentions with public communication?
That is where the strategy evolves from mere secrecy into active misdirection. You introduce the concept of the decoy. In scenarios where you are forced to communicate, you do not show them your true intention. You present a highly compelling fake intention.
Oh, like a shiny object.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You loudly proclaim the grand promises the public desperately wants to hear. That becomes the public-facing narrative. It satiates their demand for information. But your real intention, the ruthless structural maneuvers you're making behind the scenes to consolidate power, remains entirely submerged.
It's the classic magician's sleight of hand. Make them look at the waiting left hand while the right hand pockets the watch. And this ties directly into another incredibly difficult behavioral shift, the mandate to speak less than necessary. We all know the saying, don't talk more than you need to. But the strategic reality dictates you shouldn't even speak as much as is needed. You must speak as little as humanly possible.
If we connect this to the broader landscape of human psychology, we have to ask, why do we talk so much?
Usually to fill awkward silence.
Right, to alleviate social anxiety or to continuously broadcast how intelligent we are. But strategically, every single word that exits your mouth is a potential liability. When you talk constantly, you are continuously rolling the probability dice. Eventually, it is a mathematical certainty you'll expose a flaw, contradict a lie, or say something foolish.
And the public is incredibly adept at weaponizing those slip-ups. We see multi-billion-dollar CEOs destroy their stock price because they couldn't stop themselves from rambling on a podcast or firing off an unhinged late-night tweet.
All the time.
Silence is the ultimate defense mechanism because it deprives your rivals of ammunition. If you say nothing, there's nothing for them to twist.
Furthermore, silence operates as an active weapon. Nature abhors a vacuum, and humans are psychologically terrified of conversational vacuums. When you remain resolutely silent, the people across the table will experience immense discomfort.
Oh yeah, they'll just start babbling?
Exactly. In their rush to fill that silence, they will nervously chatter. And in doing so, they inevitably reveal their own hidden intentions and insecurities. By simply closing your mouth, you force them to surrender their informational advantage.
Here's where it gets really interesting though. Because silence is just the absence of data. To truly master the facade, you have to actively manipulate your identity. This is the concept of cultivating formlessness.
Right.
You have to exist in a state of continuous, unpredictable reinvention. You can never allow a fixed, rigid definition of who you are to solidify in the minds of your competitors.
In any competitive environment, predictability is a death sentence. If rivals can model your behavioral patterns, they can engineer a strategy to defeat you.
Let's think about this in the context of sports strategy. The cricket bowler analogy from the text is a perfect illustration. Imagine the final tense over of a high-stakes match. Everyone mathematically expects the captain to hand the ball to the veteran fast bowler.
It's the logical, statistically sound move.
But instead, the captain abruptly tosses the ball to a completely unpredictable, untested spin bowler that no one factored into their calculations.
The psychological disruption caused by that single, formless decision is massive.
It shatters the opponent's paradigm. The opposing team immediately panics. They think, wait, what does he know that we don't? We didn't study this bowler's tape. That unpredictability generates fear and confusion. You paralyze your opponent with variables they can't calculate.
This is the operational core of being formless. It's a strict warning against locking yourself into any rigid operational structure or permanent alliance. You must remain fluid, like water. A brilliant tactical application of this involves how you dispense praise. If you need to validate a colleague publicly today, you must resist the urge to give them unconditional praise. You always deliberately leave a tiny caveat. You might say, he is a truly brilliant operator, though I don't quite understand why he takes this specific, risky approach to client management.
Ah, I see. You're leaving the back door unlocked just in case the building catches fire.
Exactly. You are maintaining absolute optionality. Because the winds can shift violently overnight. Tomorrow, that brilliant operator might get embroiled in a scandal, or you might find yourself competing with him.
Right.
If you praised him with unshakable conviction yesterday, you look like a hypocrite when you have to attack him tomorrow. But because you planted that tiny seed of doubt, you can execute a perfectly smooth pivot. You just say, as I noted previously, his approach was deeply flawed. Being formless ensures your past declarations never trap your future maneuvers.
It's all about preserving maneuverability. So we've explored these defensive maneuvers, shielding your ego, discarding the illusion of friendship, using silence as a vacuum. But you don't win chess just by avoiding checkmate. Eventually, you have to transition to offense.
Correct. You have to begin actively manipulating the pieces to serve your ends. You must learn the mechanics of leverage.
And the foundational rule of leverage feels viscerally unfair to anyone raised with a strong work ethic. But it is undeniably the engine behind massive historical success. The rule is, you must learn how to get other people to do the grueling, heavy lifting while you extract and claim the fame, the reputation, and the credit.
It is the ultimate expression of scaling your power. As an individual, your physical energy and hours in a day are strictly finite. If your success relies solely on your own labor, your potential power has a hard mathematical ceiling. To shatter that ceiling, you must become an aggregator of other people's labor.
Thomas Edison is perhaps the most glaring example of this. When we hear Edison, we picture a lone, tortured genius sitting in a dimly lit lab, inventing the light bulb from scratch.
Which is a carefully constructed illusion.
Exactly. Edison didn't sit alone inventing thousands of patents. He was a brilliant corporate architect. He built a massive enterprise and employed thousands of the brightest engineers. It was their sweat, their failed experiments that created the technology. But whose name is on the patents?
Edison's.
Whose face is in the history books? Edison's.
What's truly fascinating here, and what separates a crude thief from a master of power, is the nuance of how this extraction of credit is executed.
Right.
If you simply walk into a room and loudly steal the credit for your team's work, you breed immediate resentment and rebellion. The system will collapse. The masterstroke requires a much more delicate operation. You must absorb the credit in such a way that the workers' feelings are entirely protected. They should willingly, almost happily, hand you the laurels.
Okay, wait. Left pause and dissect that, because it sounds impossible. Why on earth would a brilliant engineer happily surrender the credit for their life's work? I'm guessing you can't just bully them. You have to architect an environment where giving you the credit feels like their only logical option.
Exactly.
Like how massive tech platforms operate today.
Spot on. And the foundational architecture of that environment is defined by one word: dependence. You manufacture absolute dependence. You design the ecosystem so that you are the sole provider of the critical resources they require to survive and innovate.
You hold the funding.
You hold the venture capital. You own the proprietary software. You control the distribution network. You transform yourself into the indispensable infrastructure of their professional existence. When a person's entire livelihood relies entirely on your continued patronage, their psychological perception of you shifts. They look at you through a lens of absolute necessity. They must convince themselves that you are a benevolent force, because the alternative, that their survival depends on a tyrant, is too psychologically distressing. Because they need you, they will not plot against you. And they willingly surrender the individual credit because they rationalize that your overarching structural power is the only thing making their isolated work possible.
It's a masterclass in environmental design. You aren't forcing their hand. You're building a maze where the only exit leads directly to your benefit. And this concept of engineering perception brings us to a fascinating analysis of deception itself. I want to pose a question to you and to the listener. When you visualize a grand scammer, an apex con artist who steals millions, What do they look like?
Right, what's the image?
Our cinematic conditioning makes us picture someone inherently shady,
Right.
someone slick, whose very presence sets off alarm bells. But how do the most devastating scammers actually operate?
If we connect this to the broader psychology of trust, we realize that monumental deception cannot be built on a foundation of suspicion. It requires the meticulous construction of an unshakable, flawless facade of honesty.
Yes. Let's examine the anatomy of a classic Ponzi scheme to see this. We all generally know the structure paying early investors with new investors' money, but the psychological genius is rarely discussed.
Now let's break it down.
Imagine the scammer asks a potential victim for an initial investment of, say, 1 lakh rupees, promising a market-defying return of 100 rupees every single month. Now, it is crucial to recognize the victim is not inherently stupid. When they hand over that initial capital, they don't do it with blind faith.
No, they do it with intense paranoid suspicion.
Right. They are watching the scammer's every move, expecting the rug to be pulled.
The initial phase of this interaction is entirely devoid of genuine trust. From the victim's perspective, it is a high-risk experiment to test the scammer's reliability.
Exactly. So how does the scammer respond? They execute flawlessly. Month after month, they deliver that 100 rupee return with metronomic precision. A year passes. The scammer is impeccably reliable. And this is the exact moment the jaws of the trap snap shut.
The genius of the con isn't the fake return. It's the weaponization of the victim's own skepticism.
Because when the scammer successfully overcomes that heavy suspicion with relentless manufactured honesty, the victim's entire worldview inverts. They experience this profound psychological relief. They think, wow, I was so cynical, I doubted him. But he has proven to be the most honest operator I have ever met.
This highlights a critical flaw in human cognitive processing. We routinely confuse behavioral consistency with moral integrity.
Oh, that's such a good point.
The scammer demonstrated perfect consistency in delivering the small payouts, but their underlying integrity was a complete void. By enduring the initial scrutiny, the scammer completely dismantles the victim's critical thinking apparatus. The victim installs a mental firewall that protects the scammer from any future doubt.
And the cascade effect of that firewall is the real disaster. The victim, now a true believer, transitions from a passive investor to an active evangelist. They voluntarily go out to their friends, their family, their network, and put their own reputation on the line to vouch for the scammer.
They do the marketing for them.
Exactly. They say, I have personally stress tested this guy for a year. He is bulletproof. Through the victim, the scammer bundles together an astronomical sum, let's say 100 crore rupees, from this new trusting network. And the exact moment that massive transfer occurs, the scammer evaporates.
It's devastating.
The profound lesson here is that it wasn't initial gullibility that doomed the victims. It was the careful, deliberate, long-term performance of minor honesty that completely neutralized their defenses. If you want to deceive grandly, you cannot look like a cheat. You must cultivate the aura of a saint.
And this principle extends far beyond financial fraud. It is a universal rule of power dynamics. If you intend to maneuver a rival into a vulnerable position, you must first spend considerable time proving yourself to be unshakably reliable in small, highly visible, inconsequential ways. You build the reservoir of trust specifically so you can drain it all at once when it matters most.
It's deeply unsettling, and we see this exact same inversion of reality when powerful entities need to extract resources. Let's look at asking for a favor. When a truly powerful organization needs something desperately, they never ever adopt the posture of a supplicant. They do not beg.
Because begging inherently broadcasts a deficit of power. It immediately elevates the person being asked into a position of superiority and control, which a power player will never concede.
Right. You must disguise your desperate extraction as a rare, highly lucrative opportunity for the target. Let's look at political funding. Imagine a massive political party is secretly running out of capital and desperately needs a cash injection to survive. They are functionally weak. But when they approach a billionaire business leader for a donation, they do not plead for a lifeline.
The rhetoric they use is entirely inverted to project overwhelming dominance.
They sit down with the billionaire and say, we have allocated a specific window for you to provide this funding. Now, consider the immense regulatory benefits your business will enjoy when we sweep the elections and remember who stood by us. Conversely, consider the catastrophic regulatory nightmares you'll face if you decline, and we take this exclusive opportunity to your fiercest competitor.
Wow.
The choice is yours, but decide quickly.
It is a breathtaking reframing of reality. The political party is, factually, the beggar at the door, but through the power of the frame, they project themselves as inevitable kingmakers, graciously offering a ticket to the winner's circle, laced with an implicit threat of total destruction.
The billionaire doesn't walk away feeling like they did a favor.
Right.
Walk away sweating, feeling like they just paid a mandatory toll to guarantee their survival.
You completely subvert the power dynamic by dictating the emotional reality of the exchange.
Okay, so up to this point, we've explored tactics that operate on an interpersonal level. Ego, enemies, investors, corporate leaders. But power doesn't stop at the individual level. We have to ask, what happens when the target is an entire society? How do the mechanics of manipulation change when you need to scale that illusion to 1 million people?
This transition requires an entirely different understanding of human nature. When dealing with crowds, you are no longer manipulating individual logic, you are manipulating collective emotion.
And the foundational truth you must exploit is a gaping vulnerability in the human psyche. Every single human harbors a desperate, agonizing need to believe in something larger than themselves. People simply cannot tolerate the existential dread of an emotional void.
No, they can't.
The universe is chaotic. If you can step onto this stage and provide a compelling, absolute belief system to fill that void, the masses won't just follow you. They will elevate you to a divine status. They will treat you as their savior.
What's deeply cynical, yet historically accurate about this, is that the actual content of the belief system is almost irrelevant compared to the conviction with which you deliver it. You can offer a rigid return to traditional values, militant atheism, or a novel radical ideology. The crowd does not rigorously fact-check the doctrine.
All right, they just want the comfort.
They are responding to the emotional relief of structure. By identifying their need for purpose and positioning yourself as the conduit, you secure their absolute devotion.
And once you have that devotion, how do you maintain godlike control without triggering a rebellion? The secret lies in a concept that is mind-bending in its elegance: the illusion of choice. We can use a very simple domestic analogy from the text to illustrate this grand geopolitical strategy, the Dosa or Italy scenario.
It is a perfect miniaturized model of how choice architecture operates at the highest levels.
Imagine a morning routine. A mother leans down and asks her young child, "What do you want for breakfast today?" You are in charge. Do you want dosa or do you want idly? The child puffs up their chest and declares, "I want dosa."
Right.
The mother prepares the dosa, the child eats it, and feels completely empowered. The child's internal narrative is, "I am the master of my own destiny. I demanded dosa, and the universe provided it."
But if we analyze who actually wielded the power in that interaction, it was entirely the mother. She completely defined the parameters of reality. She predetermined what outcomes were possible. She was only ever going to make dosa or ayale because that was the batter she prepared the night before.
Exactly.
She didn't ask, "What do you want to eat?" out of all the food in the world. She permitted the child to select a pre-approved outcome from a tightly controlled menu.
Yes. This is exactly how choice architecture functions in establishment political parties running primary elections. You grant the masses the exhilarating illusion of democratic selection, but the establishment has already rigorously vetted and chosen all the viable candidates. You must always allow the public to feel the pride of making the final decision, but you must be the architect of the menu.
And here is the truly insidious defensive brilliance of that strategy. It creates a psychological firewall against accountability. If the public demands a specific policy from your menu, and that policy results in an absolute economic disaster, who does the public blame?
Themselves.
Psychologically, they must blame themselves. They'll say, "Well, we voted for it." They absorb the crushing guilt because they believe they were the authors of the choice. However, if the policy succeeds miraculously, you, as the visionary leader, step forward to absorb all the historical glory.
It privatizes the benefits of success while entirely socializing the cost of failure. It is absolute genius and, frankly, deeply disturbing. But it begs the question, how do you get millions of people to enthusiastically pick from your menu in the first place? You must provide a spectacle.
Yes.
The material stresses that people crave fiction. They crave the mythic arc of heroes. Plato said it's the storytellers, not the administrators, who truly rule a nation. The masses don't fall in love with a leader because they published a 400-page policy paper on tax reform.
Definitely not.
They fall in love with how a leader speaks, the emotional resonance of the narrative, and the drama.
Because the daily reality of governance and structural reform is incredibly harsh and deeply boring to the average citizen. Fiction is simple and emotionally satisfying. Leaders who master mass psychology prioritize the theatrical performance of leadership over the mundane reality of it.
We see this theatricality throughout history. Look at Julius Caesar. He didn't just conquer territories. He understood the Roman public's need for myth. He acted as the protagonist in his own state-sponsored plays. He funded unimaginably grand gladiatorial competitions. He knew to maintain the loyalty of the mob, he had to be a living god of entertainment.
Or consider Shah Jahan and the magnificent Taj Mahal. The harsh reality is that a massive, suffering workforce of unnamed laborers spent decades cutting the stone. But who absorbed the historical credit for the romance and grandeur? Shah Jahan.
This raises an important question about the mechanics of a spectacle. Why do authoritarian leaders or massive corporations spend billions building towering monuments or hosting global events?
It is a mechanism of misdirection. By creating overwhelming grandeur, you mesmerize the public. A public staring at a magnificent fireworks display is not looking down at the dirt. They are not analyzing the flaws in your governance or the corruption in your supply chain. The spectacle consumes their critical faculties.
And a vital component of this mesmerizing effect is the concept of sprezzatura, the art of making the incredibly difficult look completely effortless.
Right, never let them see you sweat.
Exactly. To maintain godlike status, you must ensure that all the grueling hard work, the late-night panic, the sheer sweat of your operation remains hidden behind a velvet curtain. When you step out into the public eye, your actions must appear bold, natural, and casually brilliant. If the public sees the veins popping in your forehead, the illusion shatters. They realize you are just a mortal, struggling exactly like they are.
However, maintaining that heroic narrative requires navigating a very dangerous psychological paradox. And this is where many leaders destroy their own movements. It is the paradox of change and perfection.
This concept blew my mind because it contradicts everything we expect from political reform. The rule dictates you must talk endlessly and passionately about the need for a glorious revolution, about tearing down corrupt old systems, but you must never, ever actually implement massive, sudden change.
It seems like a recipe for immediate political suicide.
You know, I have to push back here. If I run a campaign promising radical change, won't the crowd literally riot if I get into office and change nothing? Won't they expose me as a fraud?
It's actually based on a brilliantly cynical insight into mass psychology. The reality is that people absolutely love the aesthetic and the rhetoric of change. It's exhilarating. It feels like watching a thrilling movie trailer for a better version of their lives, but what the public secretly profoundly despises is the actual physical reality of change.
Because real change is painful.
Exactly. Real systemic change requires massive disruption. Old institutions are dismantled, jobs are displaced, routines are shattered. Life becomes terrifyingly uncertain. People are creatures of deep habit. They want the warm feeling of societal progress, but they refuse to endure the personal trauma of adaptation required to achieve it.
So if you actually violently disrupt the system to improve things, the very people who cheered for your revolution will turn around and hate you for making their daily lives harder.
Precisely. So the master stroke is to provide a constant, highly entertaining theatrical discourse about how fiercely you are fighting for revolution, while simultaneously ensuring that the core foundations of their daily lives remain entirely stable and unchanged. You feed them the entertainment of change while protecting them from the trauma of it.
You become their champion without ever forcing them to grow. And while performing this balancing act, you must also carefully avoid the trap of appearing too perfect. The logic here warns that presenting a flawless facade is highly dangerous. Perfect people are inherently suspicious.
Yes.
If you project an image of having no vices and no moments of weakness, the public's paranoia kicks in. They assume anyone hiding their normal human flaws that effectively must be concealing something truly monstrous beneath the surface.
It triggers a sort of sociological uncanny valley effect. A flawless deity is intimidating. The public cannot form an emotional connection with an entity that shares none of their struggles.
So the strategy is to deliberately manufacture and display small, highly relatable, harmless flaws. Maybe you're a brilliant CEO, but you constantly joke about being terrible at golf, or you let people see that your desk is a chaotic mess.
Right.
These manufactured vulnerabilities act as a pressure release valve for the public's envy. They see the messy desk and say, look, despite his billions, he's just a regular, flawed human exactly like me. It actively generates empathy, which provides cover while you continue to rule their lives with ironclad authority.
And the ultimate tool for generating that empathy is mirroring. The adage, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, is taken to its manipulative extreme. If you are addressing a crowd that bases their identity on deep religious faith, you must immediately proclaim your own unshakable devotion to their exact God. If they harbor a venomous hatred for a specific rival, you must passionately denounce that figure.
You reflect their own core beliefs and hatreds back at them so perfectly that they lose the ability to distinguish your true identity from their own collective ego.
You cease to be an individual leader and transform into the living avatar of their collective consciousness. It is the ultimate mass-scale application of cultivating formlessness. You become whatever the room requires you to be to extract their devotion.
So let's take a step back. We've explored building an army of loyal followers, mesmerizing them with spectacles, feeding them illusions. You've built your fortress, but power doesn't exist in a vacuum. Eventually, your expansion will inevitably cause you to collide with powerful rivals who see through your facade and actively want to tear you down. How does this framework advise handling outright conflict?
This brings us to the mechanics of warfare, conflict, and survival. And it is here that the material abandons any pretense of subtlety.
Yes, the tone shifts dramatically into something incredibly ruthless. The foundational rule of conflict is the absolute necessity of total destruction. It explicitly states that if you decide to engage and destroy an enemy, you cannot afford to stop halfway.
You cannot just wound them.
Exactly. You can't just publicly humiliate them, strip them of some resources, and then benevolently offer mercy. You cannot leave them with even a microscopic shred of residual power or dignity.
Because a wounded, humiliated enemy is, without question, the most dangerous entity on Earth.
The text leans on history here, citing the ancient Indian strategist Chanakya. The historical precedent is absolute. A humiliated, half-defeated enemy will not feel gratitude for your mercy. They will be consumed by an all-encompassing fire of vengeance.
Absolutely consumed by it.
They will retreat into the shadows, rebuild alliances, adapt to your tactics, and inevitably return to tear down your country, launch a hostile takeover, or annihilate your reputation. If you strike, you must completely eradicate their physical, financial, and psychological capacity to ever counterattack.
What is truly fascinating here is not just the philosophy of destruction, but the specific tactical advice on how to achieve it efficiently. It introduces the profoundly effective analogy of the sheep and the shepherd.
This is a brilliant operational framework. Let's say you're facing a massive rival faction, and they have an army of noisy supporters constantly attacking you. The emotional instinct is to fight back on all fronts. But the rule dictates, do not waste a single ounce of energy throwing stones at the individual sheep. Do not engage with the foot soldiers.
Right, don't fight the Twitter trolls.
Exactly. They are merely noise. They are just followers executing a program. If you want to permanently silence the attacks, you must meticulously identify the shepherd, the central vital node of leadership, who is funding, organizing, and inciting the flock.
You must concentrate every single ounce of your destructive capability, all of your capital, entirely on neutralizing that single central node.
Because crowd behavior dictates that if you brutally and visibly eliminate the shepherd, the flock will immediately panic and scatter. And there is a brilliant, cynical twist. You realize that the vast majority of those loud supporters were never actually loyal to the underlying ideology.
No, they were just magnetically attracted to the gravity of power.
Yes. If you publicly destroy their leader and establish yourself as the new apex predator, you can actually pull those very same attacking sheep over to your side. They will instinctively flock to the new strongest force.
It is an exercise in the ruthless economy of force, minimal effort for maximum systemic collapse. But the framework is also deeply pragmatic. What is the prescribed action when you are the one staring down the barrel of an overwhelmingly superior enemy? When you are vastly outgunned?
This is perhaps the most difficult rule for ambitious people to swallow. If you are facing an adversary with vastly more capital or superior force, every instinct will scream at you to stand your ground and fight back valiantly, to prove you can't be bullied. But the strategic imperative is clear. You must ruthlessly suppress your ego. You must immediately and unconditionally surrender.
To the uninitiated, surrender feels like the ultimate defeat. But within this paradigm, surrender is recontextualized as a highly sophisticated, deeply deceptive tactical maneuver.
You use surrender as a weapon. When you publicly submit to a superior enemy, you trigger a massive psychological shift in their mindset. You completely lower their guard. They experience the intoxicating rush of total victory. They become complacent, arrogant, and relaxed.
Ring.
And during that subsequent period of artificial peace, while they genuinely believe you are nothing more than a docile servant, you begin your true work. You operate as a sleeper agent, a spy within their walls.
You use your subservient proximity to map their internal weaknesses, quietly siphon their resources, and formulate a devastating long-term plan.
Use the act of surrender to buy the vital time you need to eventually destroy them from the inside out. I think of it as a ticking time bomb wrapped in a white flag.
It is the ultimate expression of hiding your true intentions. Your outward action is total submission. Your internal reality is cold, calculated preparation for assassination.
So let's explore the final phase of this journey. What does this all mean when the strategies actually work? Let's assume you've executed these rules perfectly. You've crushed your rivals, built a following, and you're experiencing an unprecedented winning streak. Your power is compounding daily. It is at this exact moment of supreme triumph that the framework offers its most critical, life-saving warning. You must possess the profound discipline to know exactly when to stop.
Because unchecked, accelerating momentum is perhaps the most uniquely dangerous and seductive force in the human experience.
We can look at real-world financial history to understand this. The contrast between two infamous figures in Indian financial markets, Harshad Mehta and Lucky Bhaskar, perfectly illustrates this point. Both men operated in incredibly murky waters, executing massive systemic manipulations to achieve unimaginable wealth. But their fates diverged completely. Harshad Mehta became entirely intoxicated by his own momentum. He believed his own myth of invincibility. He kept pushing the boundaries until the sheer weight of his sprawling structure collapsed violently on top of him. Lucky Bhaskar, facing a similar trajectory, survived. Why? Because he possessed the rare psychological discipline to recognize the edge of the cliff.
He knew when to walk away.
He knew the exact moment to hit the brakes and quietly consolidate the power he had already acquired.
If we connect this to human neurology, we have to understand why stopping is so difficult. Victory is quite literally a chemical intoxicant. The massive dopamine hits of successive wins fundamentally alter your risk perception.
Hey, totally.
Success convinces your brain that your judgment is infallible and the rules of gravity no longer apply. The framework warns that if you do not possess the conscious, almost painful discipline to artificially apply the brakes, your own unyielding momentum will carry you directly over the precipice into your own destruction.
And a crucial component of knowing when to stop is the brutal acceptance that there are some variables in the world you simply cannot dominate. Even at the absolute zenith of your power, you will inevitably encounter a person who simply cannot be bought, or an institution you cannot intimidate.
Right.
Your inflated ego will scream at you to break them. But the strategic advice is the exact opposite. You must immediately abandon the pursuit. Furthermore, you must engage in a theatrical performance of indifference. You must publicly act as if you never had any desire to control that specific variable in the first place. You dismiss it casually, saying, "Oh, I have absolutely no interest in involving myself in that petty issue."
By aggressively faking apathy, you successfully camouflage your limitations. If you visibly exert all your power to crush an obstacle and you fail, the entire world instantly sees that your power is finite.
The illusion cracks.
Exactly. But if you successfully project the narrative that you simply chose not to engage, the grand illusion of your boundless omnipotence remains perfectly intact.
Okay, let's take a deep breath. We have walked through a truly dark, treacherous forest today. We've casually discussed manipulating the ego of your boss, discarding friendship to weaponize enemies, living behind a perpetual mask, stealing the life's work of your subordinates, running psychological long cons, and ruthlessly destroying anyone in your way.
It's a lot.
Listening to this relentless cascade of deception, it feels incredibly heavy. It feels undeniably villainous. And this brings us to the final, profoundly complex phase of our deep dive, where we must grapple with the philosophical argument that attempts to justify all of this.
This is the critical juncture where we attempt to reconcile the cold realities of acquiring power with our fundamental human concepts of morality and ethics.
I want to pause and address you, the listener, directly for a moment. Absorbing these rules, hearing us unpack the blueprints for deceit, probably leaves a bad taste in your mouth. It feels bad. It feels like we just read the instruction manual for the absolute worst, most toxic people on Earth. But the framework forces us to confront a vital, highly uncomfortable question about the functional reality of the world. Does society truly judge us by the purity of our internal intentions, or does the world judge us exclusively by the tangible consequences of our actions?
To navigate this, we have to break down the comforting, intention-based philosophy we are all spoon-fed as children. We're raised on the narrative that if your heart is in the right place, if you genuinely meant well, then you are fundamentally a good person, regardless of the outcome. The strategic framework argues that this is a childish fiction designed to keep the masses docile.
Right. Let's look at the courtroom analogy. Imagine you're standing trial because you just punched a stranger violently in the face, breaking their jaw. You stand before the judge and pleads, "Your Honor, you have to look into my heart. I wasn't trying to hurt him. I saw a deadly, venomous hornet land on his cheek, and I was desperately trying to swat it away to save his life."
Right.
Did the judge care about the purity of your soul in that moment? The harsh reality is no. Society constantly claims to value good intentions, but our legal systems, our economic markets, and the cold gaze of history operate entirely on the metric of consequences. The judge says, "I have no way of verifying why you did it. The undeniable physical consequence is a broken jaw. You are going to jail. We live in a strictly consequence-based reality."
The author of our source material actually turns this analytical lens inward, using a highly modern, self-reflective analogy to prove this point. The author poses a question to the audience. Why am I, the creator of this controversial content, making this material available to the public? What is my true intention?
The YouTube creator analogy, it's a brilliant distillation. The author says, "I could easily stand here and claim my intention is purely noble. I could say I am educating society, lifting the veil on the dark arts so the innocent can protect themselves. And the people who already like the author will blindly believe that narrative."
Of course they will.
But the author points out, "My critics will look at the exact same action and declare my intention is purely selfish. They'll say, I am just churning out highly controversial, edgy content to maximize my YouTube ad revenue and sell books."
And what's truly fascinating, the ultimate conclusion we must draw here, is that true human intent is fundamentally, permanently invisible. You can never truly, empirically know what is operating inside another human being's heart. Most of the time, due to our own capacity for self-deception, we can't even be entirely sure of our own true intentions.
That's so true.
Therefore, attempting to judge the morality of an action based on invisible, unprovable intentions is an absolute fool's errand. We are left with no other logical choice but to evaluate actions strictly by the physical, measurable results they produce in the real world.
And this brings us to the grand, controversial justification for not just learning, but potentially deploying these dark arts. It posits a terrifying utilitarian moral equation. What if you use these highly manipulative, deceptive rules to ruthlessly claw your way through a corrupt system into a position of immense, unshakable power?
Okay.
And then, once you have secured that throne, you utilize that immense power to enact policies that create undeniably, objectively good consequences for the world. What if you use the power you stole to successfully cure a devastating disease or permanently lift millions of people out of crushing poverty? If the result is a massive net positive for humanity, does the manipulative action used to achieve it lose its bad label?
Right. Do the ends justify the means?
The framework argues that there is no such thing as an inherently good or bad action existing in a moral vacuum. There are only good or bad results. If the ultimate end is genuinely, profoundly good, it completely and retroactively justifies the Machiavellian destructive means required to achieve it.
It is an incredibly dangerous ethical framework, one that can easily be used to justify horrific atrocities if the leader's definition of good is warped. Yet it forces us to look honestly at the brutal reality of historical progress. If we examine the history of the world, many of the greatest leaps forward in human rights and societal well-being were not orchestrated by pure innocent saints.
No, they weren't.
They were orchestrated by deeply flawed, ruthlessly pragmatic leaders who were absolute masters of these exact strategies. They understood that you cannot change the world without first acquiring the power to do so, and they were willing to wade through the mud to get it.
Which brings us full circle to exactly why we embarked on this deep dive today. You must understand this machinery. You must learn this craft. We are not doing this because we hope you log off, go into work tomorrow, and become a ruthless dictator who destroys your colleagues.
Please don't do that.
We are doing this because you urgently need the ability to recognize the thieves who are actively, right now, trying to pick the lock on your front door. If you stubbornly refuse to learn what a lockpick looks like because you think the tool itself is evil, you will simply end up holding the door wide open for the people who want to rob you. You study the architecture of the trap not to build one, but to protect yourself, your family, your career, and your sanity from those who will inevitably try to wield these weapons against you.
We have covered a truly staggering amount of psychological and strategic ground today, peering into the hidden, often ugly machinery of human interaction and systemic control. And as we conclude, I want to leave you with a profound thought to mull over as you transition back into the normal rhythms of your daily life. I want you to think back to the last time you felt truly deeply swayed by a powerful figure, whether it was a charismatic boss, an inspiring political leader, or a compelling public intellectual. When you felt that undeniable surge of inspiration, that deep pull of loyalty, were you actually responding to their genuine, authentic character? Or were you simply the intended audience for a flawlessly executed, carefully constructed spectacle designed to extract your devotion?
That is a heavy question.
And perhaps the more terrifying question to ask yourself is this. If you suddenly found yourself in a desperate situation, and you knew that utilizing just one of these dark rules, deploying a strategic, devastating lie, or executing a calculated, necessary betrayal was the absolute only way to achieve something undeniably, objectively good for the survival of your family or your community, would you have the stomach to do it?
We've shown you the depths of the muddy waters. How you choose to navigate them from here on out is entirely up to you. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.